This edition of MacVoices is supported by Screencasts Online, your source for new Mac and iOS tutorials every week. To learn more and for a 14-day free trial, visit screencastsonline.com. There was a small problem with my audio settings for this interview, but there was nothing wrong with our guests, so I'll ask you just to bear with the less than perfect audio on my side and enjoy what Charles had to say. Welcome back to MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have Charles Edge back with us. You know him as a server guy, you know him as a Take Control author, but he's also the product manager for JAMF software, and they have a new product out called Bushel that we're going to talk about. I think it's going to be interesting for those of you that are interested in small business, medium-sized business, who knows, maybe even large business. Charles, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me back, Chuck. It's awesome.
We have to do this more often. It's just a lot of fun.
It is. I've done 2 other podcasts recently, and it's really awesome. It's fun to do.
Good. Well, they aren't as fun as this, right?
No, this definitely.
No. Yeah, okay. Just wanted to get that out of the way. So JAMF software has a new product called Bushel. What is Bushel?
So Bushel is Apple device management for small, medium-sized work groups. And so a work group could be a smaller, medium-sized company, or it could be a smaller, medium-sized group within a large enterprise.
Okay, so that sounds just on the surface like a lot of products out there that we see go by that really don't apply to many of us. What differentiates Bushel from some of the competitors, and what makes it stand out?
So Bushel has about a 5-minute setup process, and at the end of that 5 minutes, you can enroll iPhones and iPads and OS X. And then once you've gotten a device enrolled, you can push apps, force screensaver passwords, or force PIN codes on iOS devices, and manage them through Apple's new DEP program, which is device enrollment. So if you buy a device, let's say you have a couple of employees and one happens to live in another state, you can just ship the device to them and have it automatically set up through the Apple DEP.
Now, when you say automatically set up, is this set up as we connect the iPhone, set it up, and then ship it? Or do we ship the iPhone, have them turn it on, and then we configure it?
You ship it, have them turn it on, and then we configure it. Or you configure it ahead of time from our console, and then since it's a DEP device, it activates using the profile we send it. So what's really, really cool about this is each employee gets to open their own device and get that new device smell, take the cellophane off the device, and see all those awesome packaging, and they don't have to have this device that's already got the nerdy IT guy's Dorito-laden fingerprint. So
You're just perpetuating the image.
I am the image.
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I know some of those people. No, you don't fit it. Oh, well, okay, so this is really, really interesting to me. And so I want to take it from the ground up. I assume that because you can set the device up, you can also delete the device or render it inoperable?
Correct. You can lock it, you can wipe it, or, and this is really cool, you can just remove your stuff from it. So hypothetically, you have a device that is leaving your organization. You've decided to let an employee keep it, and you can just remove the organization stuff and send it off to the employee. Hypothetically, your kids go off to college and you want to keep all their iBooks because now it's your turn to read them. You could revoke those assets and then assign them to someone else. So using the Apple Volume Purchase Program, when it comes to the apps, you can take an app and you can associate it to multiple parties. Or you can revoke it from a party and associate it to another one. You can't give it to 2 at once.
Okay, and that's there's so many things here that are really interesting to me. So when you deploy it from your dashboard, that means that I can then, if I'm the one that's you're deploying it to, I can still download apps from my own account. I can still do things like it was my phone. So it's one user, but you're the guy that has control over certain things.
Correct. Yeah, our goal is definitely, and I think Apple's goal in building this framework is definitely for people to use one Apple ID for work and home. And so the volume purchase program allows us to send an app to a device and then revoke the app from the device. And by device, we really mean the Apple ID. So once we send an app to you, you can then install that app on any device that you have enrolled.
So I get it that this is not going to be for everyone, but why wouldn't I want to use it as someone who has quite a few Apple devices hanging around this place, and especially since we're also talking apparently about OS X as well.
Yeah, I would say that the main reasons to use it, and the smaller the organization is, there's kind of different reasons to use it. When you get to the point where there's like 2 or 3 people, then it's more for remote wipe. Protecting your assets if you lose the device or if the device gets stolen, being able to lock it if you're not sure where you put it, and you think you might end up finding it and you don't want to wipe it, things like that. As you grow, I think you run into these roadblocks where, now we have multiple Apple IDs and multiple people using multiple Apple IDs, and so we need to control the amount of money that we're spending on apps by being able to revoke apps and assign them to other people. And then the DEP is just icing on the cake. It's the coolest piece of technology. I mean, to have a device show up and automatically be configured is one of the coolest things Apple's allowed us to do on the sysadmin side. So.
Yeah, I can see why. The volume purchase program, again, this is something that a lot of our listeners and viewers are not going to be familiar with. So what does that mean? Does it mean that I buy a copy of an app and I can deploy it to 2, 3, 4, 5 machines, or how is that working? Because of course, right now, if I sign on to any device with my Apple ID, I have access to all the programs, songs, music, whatever I've bought with that Apple ID.
Correct. Yeah. So it's really for having multiple Apple IDs in motion. So really the VPP or the volume purchase program is only beneficial if you have at least 2 Apple IDs. And so basically, you have 2 Apple IDs. You buy 2 copies of the app on the volume purchase program site, which is a special portal at Apple. And then you can assign those and revoke those from different Apple IDs, 2 different Apple IDs. So you have 4 people, you can buy 4, and then 1 person leaves, you hire a replacement, and then you can assign the apps to that replacement without having to purchase new ones.
Got it.
When you revoke apps, you also revoke the app from the device. So any data that was in that app is suddenly gone.
Any situation where when you revoke that, it pulls the data back to you, or is it just gone? Yeah,
luckily, and we like it this way, none of the data ever flows through us. So we can push mail settings to devices. So you buy a bunch of new devices, we can set the mail up on them automatically. That's a huge feature of this program as well. But your mail never flows through us, only the account name and the server name and things like that. And most of that stuff is pretty publicly accessible. Like if for MacVoices, I can just dig for the MX record out on the internet and it'll tell me what your mail server is. So really what we're doing is we're offering that guidance. And then there's another feature called Managed Open-End that Apple gives us. And what that means is any app that we deploy to those devices through the volume purchase program and any mail account that we deploy to devices, we keep the data sequestered in those places. So, for example, someone emails you an attachment, you open the attachment in an app that we gave you, and then you try to move that attachment, that Word document, for example, to an app that we didn't give you, and it will block you from being able to do so. So at that point, you're keeping your assets in your organization's like container.
I guess it's interesting that you brought up mail, because I was thinking another direction. I was thinking, may not be the best example, but let's say that I had someone working on a number spreadsheet, doing sales projections or whatever, and then I find out that they need to be terminated. There's no way for me to reach over and grab that sales projection spreadsheet he's been working on if I delete numbers from his system.
Not through Bushel, but that is a very valid use case and something that we see happen all the time. And so what we see happening there is people are using a program like Dropbox or Box. And then all the data lives in Box. Now, the managed open-in keeps the data from leaving Box. But because the data is in Box, you can still access it on their Box account if it's an organizational Box account or a corporate Box account. So
okay.
That's how I would go about that. And that's a very, very valid use case to kind of plan in advance,
Right. Right. Yeah, you just require them to store it in Dropbox or in Box in this case, and then it's accessible to you under normal circumstances. It is accessible to you if they have to be terminated.
Right, and provided that it's synced, which Box is great. It syncs things super fast. So provided that it's been synced, then it should be available immediately. So the part that Bushel would play in that paradigm is we would send Box to the device, and then we would keep the data from being opened in any app that you didn't send the device. That way, when the person left, you had a pretty good sense that your data was not also in some other app on that device.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And obviously, you've thought through a lot of these things. I'm not the first guy to ask about it.
Luckily, right?
Yeah. If I come up with a new one, you're in trouble. You did mention, though, something about being able to lock the device. And that's not something that, again, for those of us familiar with our iDevices and iCloud and all that, hopefully we've put a lock on it, the number lock, so that people can't just pick up your iPad and go. But we really don't have a way to lock the device remotely. We can wipe it, and of course that means we've wiped everything and the device is gone. But is this a little more fine-grained control of those kind of things, or is it pretty much the same concept?
Yeah, it's a lot more fine-grained control, I would say. I mean, you have the option of unenroll the device. So remove the device from Bushel, which takes away everything that Bushel gave the device. And then you have the option to lock the device. So, require a new PIN code. If someone forgets a PIN code, you also have the option to just reset the PIN code. And so now you're removing a PIN code, you're putting it back out there. And then if you know that the device is gone, you're pretty sure it's been stolen, you can just straight up wipe it. So you can lock it, you can unlock it, you can wipe it. And then in a subsequent release in probably early 2015, you'll also be able to bypass activation lock. And so what we're seeing is a lot of people walking into Apple retail stores because they had an employee who left the organization and the employee's iCloud account left the organization. And if you enable Find My iPhone, then you enable device lock or activation lock, and then no one can activate the device. So that means now you have to dig up the receipt and you have to go back to Apple and say, well, here's my proof that I own that device. Will you unlock it for me now? And they're very kind to do so, but it's a somewhat latent process by design. And so we'll have the ability to bypass that.
What kind of items can you deploy? And we've talked about apps, of course, and we've talked a lot about the permissions and access. Do you have the ability to deploy music? I think you even said ebooks at one point. No music.
Yeah, ebooks we're not ready. We've written most of the code, so it'll be here shortly at some point. But we cannot and will not be able to do music, and no other mobile device management tool can. It's just DRM and things like that. It's a very complicated thing, and maybe someday Apple will give us the ability to do so, but currently they don't.
Yeah, that's not exactly a surprise, because I can see all kind of licensing problems and ownership problems and who bought it and how many people are therefore able to access it. So.
It's a very complicated thing, and that's probably why we don't have a music server, a few other things like that. But there are certain things we can do with AppKit from the dev side, but that's one of those things that a lot of the stuff we do, we're trying to shoot for what brings value to small businesses, and music is more of a personal thing. And you run into a really funny place when you're building business tools and there's all this consumer technology and you're trying to figure out, like, how do we make these things work together, work better? For example, we don't see the GPS coordinates of a device, whereas you would see the GPS coordinates of a device if you were using a tool like Find My iPhone, for example. So.
Yeah, actually, thank you, because I wanted to go there a little bit about GPS and being able to locate it. That's an advantage of Find My iPhone, that we have that ability to sort of see where it is. Is that something you can piggyback on, or is that just way outside the purview of this software?
It's something that most of us have chosen not to tackle. There are a couple of providers of this type of software that do that, but most of us just think it's kind of creepy for your organization to follow you where you're going, if that makes sense. And there are also legal ramifications around, if I let you go and you're at a place, and you might make an argument that I let you go because you were at that physical location. When you go home from work, you're home from work. And even if it's a device that we give you at work, I don't think it's really our business to know where you're going. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. It's an interesting haired split.
Yeah. Now, there are certain use cases like trucking where you want to know where the GPS coordinates are, and that's the purpose of that program, And there are specialized apps for that kind of thing. But when you get into like global device management, as opposed to very specialized app-based ERP type stuff, then it just gets a little weird fast. For example, I don't have access to the database, so I don't know, for example, if you used Bushel, I wouldn't know what apps that you put on your device. Now, and there is someone who has access to the database, but they don't have access to source code, so they wouldn't actually understand what's in that database. So protecting privacy, Apple is huge on protecting privacy, and we really, and most device management companies would also piggyback on that.
Okay, so I want to make sure I heard that right. So you can see the apps you deploy to my device, but you can't see anything else I've added to it.
Correct. And yeah.
Well, and I guess, does that affect your ability to troubleshoot any issues with apps I would add, or are you pretty confident that, given that they're only getting there through the App Store, that they're okay?
Pretty confident that they're okay. I mean, I've definitely loaded some apps off the App Store that make my phone run very, very poorly. In fact, I've had apps that made my phone crash. And Apple does a really good job of protecting the App Store from, apps that are not so great for your device. But at the same time, it does happen. So I guess there's a use case around being able to see them, but we chose not to.
Yeah, it's a choice. It's a choice, and I appreciate the privacy thing. It is sort of a tricky, slippery slope, trying to give someone a device that is as personal as their phone, and still have it be business functional. So I think that's really good. In fact, not too long ago on another one of the shows, we talked about the devices that some of the insurance companies are now giving you to plug into your car, and the privacy implications of those. They obviously are measuring how you're driving. Are you a jackrabbit, or are you, the little old lady who goes to church on Sunday? But they're also able to track, obviously, GPS locations. They're able to track time of day. And there are a lot of things that you just start to think, wow, that's just a little bit maybe over the top for what I want to give them, for what the rate reductions they may give me back. That seems to apply here too.
Yeah. So when you install an app on your phone, if it wants to access your contacts, it tells you. It has to tell you. If it wants to access your GPS, it tells you. If it wants to access your camera roll, or your photo roll, it has to ask you all those things. With mobile device management, we don't necessarily have to ask, because we're running on the back end of the system. So there's no app for Bushel that runs on your device. Your device just gets enrolled into Bushel. So I think Apple is very clear with what they want us to do and don't want us to do in terms of protecting privacy. They don't give us access to a lot of things that I think a lot of companies would love us to have access to, but when you get right down to it, it's not appropriate, And so, there's definitely a fine line, but I think we are on the side, and as do most vendors of this type, on not even coming close to that fine line. Like, we're all so far away from it, and nobody wants to be that guy or that company, And I think when we were debating some of the processes around how we troubleshoot things, the CTO of JAMF, Woody, he had a very, very good quote, which was, "Just don't be creepy." and it really changed my view, because coming from the product development and the person who's going to have to be helping troubleshoot and things like that, we're like, well, we need access to everything, and then not really. I mean, one of the best parts about iOS especially, and OS X in this regard specifically as well, is you can't break your device unless you drop it, but you can't corrupt the operating system without jailbreaking it. And I don't consider jailbroken devices to count, if that makes sense. But the fact that you can't, that it's so containerized, we don't need to know that much to be able to troubleshoot it, because we can assume that in all instances, that the output will be similar in various use cases. So,
yeah, I can see situations like you're describing where the companies would really like to have those capabilities and that information, but you're the one that's going to get named on the lawsuit, and so.
Yeah. Yeah, I rue the day that occurs.
yeah. Best to just try to keep yourself out of that as much as possible.
Yeah, and by not having data, we're pretty well out of things. We don't ever get GPS coordinates. We don't know where people are. The only thing that I could envision something like that is someone might say, "What time did someone wipe a device?" Something like that. Evidentiary things. It's hard to imagine too many use cases where we'd get a phone call, but there's definitely a lot of interesting things in that area. So.
This edition of MacVoices is supported by Screencasts Online, your source for new Mac and iOS tutorials every week. To learn more and for a 14-day free trial, visit screencastsonline.com. One thing we can all agree on: Don McAllister's Screencasts Online is the gold standard for screencast tutorials. Each week, Screencasts Online delivers a brand new Mac tutorial and also a brand new iOS tutorial. That means each week you get to learn something new for your Mac, iOS device, or both. And we're talking about in-depth, step-by-step instruction, not just quick overviews. And if that isn't enough, Screencasts Online Monthly Magazine brings interesting and informative articles to you each month via Apple's newsstand. With a back catalog of over 500 video tutorials, Screencasts Online is one of the most complete video resources for learning about Apple-oriented software on the web. You can enjoy a 14-day free trial to find out that Screencasts Online is right for you, then sign up for a quarterly or yearly subscription that includes everything, including Screencasts Online magazine. Just visit screencastsonline.com to sign up. Screencasts Online, video tutorials you will really watch and enjoy. Thanks to Screencasts Online for their support of MacVoices. I wanted to touch a little bit again on the data that you can have access to and can wipe, and I think you may have already answered it by the "don't be creepy" comment. But do you have the ability to deploy or obtain photos?
No,
I wouldn't think so. But if I'm a salesperson and I take a photo, I have the ability, I guess, to share it back to Dropbox or Box, and that way my employer would have the ability to do it, but they wouldn't have the ability to see the photos I took on Saturday night.
Absolutely. And we have a bunch of customers that are real estate agents. And one of the big things that they do is they run around and take pictures of houses to post on MPLS or Yeah. And so they need their camera rolls shared back to the company, and they have a special device just for that. And so in that case, they do use Box, I believe, in a couple of different cases, and Dropbox and a couple others. And that's really the way that you would do that. Apple does make PhotoKit available to other apps, or the photos available, your camera roll available to other apps, but you would have to have an app running and then sync the photos that way. So, i.e. through Dropbox, because Dropbox does ask you, do you want us to sync this camera roll, both on OS 10 and on iOS, I believe now. And so that's definitely how you do that. Luckily, we don't have access to any of that. We don't get any emails flowing through our servers. All we get are settings. So if you deploy something to my camera,
if you deploy something to my iPhone, I launch it and it says, "Can I have access to your camera roll?" Does that warning not come up since you've deployed it, or do I have the option at that point to give it?
Yep, it does still come up. I'm not aware of any way that we can. As far as I'm aware, there's no way that we can bypass those warnings for a given app. Hypothetically, there are a couple of ways that might be possible, but I'm not aware of them.
I'm not even thinking about bypassing the warnings, but I guess my point is that could I inadvertently give you access to my camera roll by accepting that from an app that you have deployed as opposed to one I downloaded? Only
if you accepted the prompt. So for the Dropbox example, if we deployed Dropbox and Dropbox asked you, then hypothetically that would be possible. I installed an emoji app the other day, and it asked me if it could access my camera roll, and I'm like, uninstall.
Yeah.
So, the fact that we give you an app also, you can still remove the app, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, you're not stuck with the app. Hypothetically, we could just deploy it again.
Little battle back and forth. See who gives first.
Yeah, I've seen that happen before, but not with Bushel, but with previous tools that I've used of this type. But I find that that the privacy thing doesn't come up too much when it comes to mobile device management. What does come up sometimes is, I need to be able to use this document in this other app, the managed open-end stuff. And really what we normally try to say there is, well, delete the app real quick, and then we'll deploy it to you through Bushel, and that way you can use that as part of your managed open-end. So, but one of the goals is definitely if you have a BYOD type of environment, for example, or bring your own device, as the industry term has become, and you leave the organization, we want to remove our stuff without being malicious, kind of, and wiping your whole device. Because you may have photos that haven't synced with your iCloud. I know my personal iCloud storage is full right now. I need to go upgrade it again.
Again?
Yeah, I would hate to lose my Christmas photos, things like that. So, one of the goals of a lot of these types of tools, and with Bushel specifically, is to be able to selectively remove the things that someone doesn't need when they leave. So,
I like the approach you're taking here. It sounds like it's a reasonable approach. If you end up dealing with unreasonable people, it sounds like you could exercise certain options if you really had to, but you're struggling hard not to have to do that, to leave their devices untouched and not cost them any data if you didn't have to, just for the sake of the company you're working with. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that in so many ways. I would want an employer like that if I could have them, that wouldn't just say, oh, well, unilaterally, bang, you're done, and kill the machine.
Thanks. It's the only area of my life that I am responsible. So.
Oh, tell us more, Charles.
No, thanks.
A little time on the couch with Charles Edge here.
Oh dear.
I don't know where to go from that.
I know, right?
Okay, well, we'll get away from responsibility. Talk to us a little bit about what hardware is required to run this software, and if there is there anything else special other than just an internet connection to use it.
Just an internet connection. It's software as a service, so everything lives on our servers, which are on Amazon's cloud and extremely secure. In terms of the client devices that can run Bushel, for just the standard push management, so wipe and remote lock and stuff like that, iOS 4 and up is supported. For VPP, I believe it's iOS 6 and up, and then for DEP, it's iOS 7 and up.
So that's something I'm sorry I didn't understand. So you are able, I'm able to run this inside a web browser. Can I run it from an iOS device to manage devices?
Yeah, it's fully responsive design. So if you run it on an iPad or an iPod Touch, there's a view. You'd be using Safari, but there's a view specifically to that size of device. And we try really hard to make each view really easy to use. Because our goal here is not to work with IT people. It's to work with normal people. So a director of marketing in a large company can spin up their own devices or their own management and still be compliant with their larger corporations' requirements. And then a small business can spin up their own thing without hiring someone to come in and help them or hiring an IT person.
And that's the next question I was going to ask, is the learning curve. Is this difficult to learn, or is it pretty straightforward?
I certainly hope it's not difficult to learn. Otherwise, I might not be a very good product manager. We have a dedicated user experience designer who is just charged with trying to make it as simple as is humanly possible. When I set it up, I can normally get it set up in about a minute for each new account. For people who we just watch and we don't help, it typically takes about 4 or 5 minutes. So even if you knew nothing about computers, hopefully it wouldn't take more than half an hour, if that makes sense. And then you've got all your devices enrolled in one place. A couple places where it might get a little challenging, like the device enrollment program, you need to work with Apple Retail, Apple Online, or an education, Apple Education, in order to get a device enrollment program account. And that's because at the point of sale, that device gets tied to your organization. So we can't help with that. You can't do that on your own. That has to be done through Apple. And you have to, there are a few requirements to be able to be in that program. The volume purchasing program, you have to have a DUNS number or be an educational institution. So that's for companies specifically. And then Apple push notification certificates, you have to have an Apple ID to use those. So
I asked that question just if for some reason it keeps coming up in some recent editions of MacVoices, that the more sophisticated and the more powerful some of this software becomes, the more it becomes extra difficult to make it simple to use. I mean, when it's hard to have two options when there really are 20 underlying. So that's why I asked that. You've just in that last little segment there, you brought up educational institutions several times. Is this something that you're seeing adopted by schools for deployment of iPads to kids?
Absolutely, but in a very narrow use case. So the traditional device management, you need users and groups and all these different obfuscation layers or organizational layers more in order to be able to assign different things to different people. So for example, you have a set of apps for first grade, as my daughter has. And when you go to second grade, the school doesn't want to buy all those apps again, so they'll revoke them and they'll send them to the second graders. And then when they go to third grade, same thing. That way they're not buying a whole new set of apps for, let's say, 10,000 first graders every year. With Bushel, what we're seeing is the kindergarten teacher or the third grade teacher might use it for their classroom. So the district might go ahead and pay for their accounts, but the teachers are managing the devices in their own classrooms. And that's a very narrow use case. So I don't want to say that it's good for everyone in education, but in those cases, it's been pretty excellent, and it's cheap enough so that it doesn't raise a bunch of concern about spending a bunch of money here and there. if that makes sense. So pilot programs also in education, like, oh, we're going to try this for the 8th graders this year. If it works, maybe we'll go 1-to-1. We've seen a lot of success with that kind of stuff.
How many devices can this software manage? Are we iPhones, iPads, and Macs?
It's hard for me to imagine that someone would want to do 100,000 devices with Bushel because they would need more settings. As things get complicated, they necessarily get more complicated, but they could do that. We have no limit on the number of devices.
Wow.
So, I might need to, I might appreciate a heads up so I could get a couple more servers in our farm. But we could handle 100,000 today if they were to show up.
Wow, for one account, you could handle, if I deploy 100,000 devices, one account can handle 100,000 devices.
Yeah, we have a cluster of a whole bunch of servers that are running behind this thing. We were extremely deliberate. I mean, and I come from the sysadmin side, so I'm a server guy to some degree. So I'm going to get a lot of servers if I can.
like the guy in the Navy who wants a bigger ship. You want more servers.
Yeah, I just want more servers.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. But yeah, however, at that 100,000 person organization, I suddenly think that you would definitely need things like groups and a lot of like being able to scope things to a group of users or a group of devices that meet a certain criteria. For example, I was working with a school district back when I was doing a lot of work with Apple, and they bought GarageBand for every device. They didn't realize in the process that 2,500 of their devices didn't have front-facing cameras, which is a requirement for GarageBand. And so 2,500 copies of GarageBand were just wasted money. Apple was kind enough to let them go back on that purchase, which is really kind of hard to orchestrate. But we're all as good to schools as we can be, and so. You would at that point you would want to know how many of your devices could take a certain app before you just scope it out to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. A lot of different facets to this. The more we talk, the more facets I find out about, and the more things I think about from an application standpoint, both from the user and the admin side. So, how long did it take to develop this software?
It's been in development for at least 1.5 years that I'm aware of. I only got involved at the last mile, you might say, about 6-7 months ago. But it was in development by one person up until that point, and then I was brought in to bring on a new team to finish building it, to get it production ready, to get the servers ready, to get marketing, advertising, those machines support that need to go around a new product before it's brought into the market. So,
very good, very good. Okay, so we've waited until the end. What kind of pricing do we have for this? Is this tiered, or is this a one-time fee, or what?
So as a bunch of Apple aficionados, we can't stand tiered pricing. So it's free for up to 3 devices, and then $2 a device after that.
Oh, wait a minute. It's free up to 3 devices?
Correct. So if you have a Mac, a MacBook Air, an iPhone, and an iPad, you're good. The way we look at it is that's about the number of devices that people like to test with before they decide if they're going to buy something. So similar to a MailChimp or a SurveyMonkey, there are a bunch of things that are free, and then it's kind of all you can eat after that.
And that's per device, what, per month?
Per device per month.
Okay, yeah. Gee, that shocks me. I mean, top to bottom. That means I can sign up and start to play. I could play with it just for myself if I felt like it really might be worth it to be able to manage devices.
We think everyone should play with it.
Yeah. Yeah, the trouble is that I'm going to go way beyond the free number. I'm going to pay you guys a lot of money.
Well, that's the plan.
Yeah.
We're altruistic, but not that altruistic.
You know, all joking aside, though, I can actually see a number of different use cases here and a number of different things where this would be nice to for those of us who support families in technology, of being able to deploy things, and it goes way beyond remote sharing and some of that.
So when you say families, we get into a funny spot. So there is family, a lot of new family stuff in Yosemite, right? So this product is for organizations and not necessarily families, if that makes sense. We can't restrict families from using it. Anyone can get an Apple ID, and all you need is an Apple ID to use it. For it to really bring value, you kind of need to use the VPP program, the volume purchasing, or DEP, both of which are only available if you have a DUNS number. So, and you can only have a DUNS number if you're an organization, right? So while we can't restrict families from using it, because we, scale, hundreds of new customers coming in, how are we going to know who's what when we don't ever talk to anybody unless they ask us technical questions? It's definitely not meant for that, if that makes sense. And you can see that in the mobile device management license, or the license agreement for the volume purchasing program, the license agreement for the Apple push notification certificates, and places like that, where Apple specifically precludes the device management frameworks from home use, if that makes sense. So.
Okay, so forget the whole interview here for right now, because now I'm trying to game the system a little bit. So if I had, let's say, two devices, I had an iPhone and an iPad, I could use this without going through the volume licensing program if I was willing to buy, say, 2 copies of program X, as opposed to just buying one and sharing it.
Yes.
Is that so? So I could theoretically deploy 10 iPhones, not being part of the volume purchasing program. It just means I would have to buy 10 licenses or 10 copies of every program I wanted to deploy.
Correct. And when you went to send, now that would preclude managed OpenN from functioning. If you're not sending an app through the volume purchasing program, we can't really lock the data into that app, if that makes sense.
Okay. But I could still deploy it and delete it.
You can still deploy it and delete it, hypothetically.
Okay.
And definitely free apps. Free apps don't really require the volume purchase program.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
And a lot of people use a lot of free apps these days. So.
Yeah. Fascinating service here, and again, super affordable for what we're talking about. I think it's fascinating. And again, I was waiting for. I mean, I didn't think I would have batted an eye at $300 or $400, and then an annual fee or a monthly fee or whatever. So to be able to go in there and work with it a little bit to get started, and then find out if it's for you, for your business, or whatever your application, that's fantastic.
Yeah, at 3 devices for free, we hope that people can quickly figure out whether it's good for them. You never want people to use things that aren't right for them, of course. And if it's just your devices, there's Find My iPhone, and that's great for just your devices. But when you get into these larger scales, and by larger scales, 4 or 5 devices. If you have a company where you've given 4 employees iPhones, that's plenty. And then when you get into much larger scales, a few hundred, then I think a lot of people would outgrow Bushel, because you would need, the economies of scale require certain features to kind of progress. And JAMF Software, the company that makes Bushel, we also make a product for those large organizations called the Casper Suite. So.
Okay. Where do we send folks to learn more about this?
Oh, Bushel.com.
Oh, that's easy.
Bushel.com, or just Bushel.com, or login.bushel.com.
Okay.
All the different subdomains. But yeah, if you just do Bushel.com in a browser. And then we have a blog that has a whole lot of information. I'm a natural writer, so the team does a lot of writing about a lot of different things, including some apps that we think help organizations succeed with Apple. So list making apps, things like that. We like to go into, how, not just how to manage devices, but maybe how to get more out of them.
Great. So Bushel.com to learn more about this and maybe sign up. And I can think of already a couple companies I'd like to refer to you, because I think it would benefit them in so many ways, just knowing some of the stories I've heard about trying to manage their devices. So
please do. And I can actually give you a referral code just for your listeners if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. Folks will put that in the show notes, just so they know where you came from.
Awesome.
Charles, it's great to see you again. Thanks for taking the time to tell us about this fascinating software, and I bet it's something that a lot of people don't even know is out there yet. So
anytime, Chuck, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure as always.
I'll be pestering you again, I'm sure.
I can't wait.
Have a good one.
Thanks. You too.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Go check out Bushel.com. Whether you have the need for it or not, it just sounds like something that is interesting and you're going to want to learn a little more about. This is the way the world's going. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the MacVoices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices magazine on Flipboard by visiting macvoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.